Hello, welcome to another Dun.js live stream. This time we're going to be talking through upgrading to CanJS 4.0. I'm Kevin, and we've got a couple people here with me. And we'll say hi, Austin.
Hello, Internet. My name is Austin.
Hello, Mike.
Howdy, y'all. Mike's here, doing the upgrade myself.
All right, thank you both for joining me. Please feel free to ask me questions as I go. All right, let's get started. Let me share my screen. All right, upgrading to CanJS 4.0. What we're going to do today is we'll take a quick walk through the actual upgrade process. Then we'll take a more detailed look at the changes you might need to make in your app to get it up and running on 4.0. And then lastly, we'll talk about all the new features and all the awesome stuff that makes the upgrade worthwhile. All right, the upgrade process. So this is kind of a run through of the process. You first want to make sure that you're on the latest version of CanJS 3.0 and you remove any warnings or can log messages that you see. Then you'll install the 4.0 packages. Then you'll run our code migration tool, can-migrate, and then you'll do some testing and fix any remaining issues. So let's take a look at each of these steps. So the first thing is to remove warnings in CanJS 3.0. So we've got a little video here. So before upgrading to 4.0, you want to make sure you're on the latest version of 3.0. You kind of load your app like I'm doing here in this video, and then look for any of these messages that say can log, and you'll want to fix as many of those as you can. We'll talk about some of the examples of what these messages are and specific ones to look for as we go through the changes later in this presentation. But what I'm doing here is I'm just taking a look at each of those messages, figuring out what it's telling me to change, making that change, and then reloading the app. Here we've got some changes for can route. This app is pretty simple, so there's not a ton of stuff that needs to change here. I'm gonna skip ahead because this is boring. And then at the end, you'll load your app, make sure there's no can log messages, and you should be good to go. All right, the next step is to install the CanJS 4.0 packages. The easiest way to do this is using npm outdated. So you can run npm outdated in your app. It'll give you a bunch of stuff. You want to install the latest version of any of the can-dash packages. So you can do these one by one. Like here, I'm installing can-ajax.
Yeah, Kevin, I was just doing this, and there are some packages where latest is really for CanJS 5.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now that CanJS 5.0 is released, what you want to do is, if you run into that kind of stuff, if it looks like you've got some packages that have jumped a couple major versions, what you want to do is take a look at the 4.x legacy branch of the CanJS package and its package.json and see exactly what versions it's using. It's probably the easiest way to do that.
Yeah, the dependencies listed in that package.json gave me the versions I needed for 4.
Cool. Yep. And if anyone out there is doing this and runs into issues, please feel free to ask us on Gitter or the forums or anything like that. So you can upgrade these packages one at a time, or you can do them all at once. You can kind of see here in this video, I am upgrading all of them all at once, or installing the new versions all at once. That's totally fine. You'll also want to make sure that you update any CanJS plugins. So we'll see here in this app, we're using bittabs and also Changes-stache. These don't start with can, but they are CanJS plugins. So you want to make sure you update those as well.
Yeah, bittabs was one of the ones where latest was not what I wanted, I think. Or actually, that one was okay. That was the one that was okay with latest.
Yeah, there's only a few breaking changes in CanJS 5.0. Can connect, things like can route push state. There's only a few of them, but you will have to look out for those. The last thing you want to do is make sure if you have a yarn lock file or a package lock file, you want to make sure you delete this and then run a fresh npm install at the end. Otherwise, you might get some dependencies of dependencies that are not up to date. Cool. The next step is to run our code mod. So we have a project called can-migrate that has code mods for making this upgrade a little bit easier. So you want to run those. First thing you want to do is install globally install can-migrate. So you can do that with npm install -s global, or the shorthand npm i-g is the same thing. So once that installs, I should have sped these videos up. Once that installs, this is the basic basic command. Oh, I screwed that up. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Back.
If you had an older version of can-jquery, that will update it to the latest, right?
Yes, it will. All right, what I was saying. This is the basic command for running can migrate. So you want to say can migrate and then give a glob pattern for the files that you want to upgrade, and then --apply that says don't actually run the code mods, otherwise it'll do a dry run if you don't use this apply flag. And then you give it --can version and the version of CanJS you want to upgrade to. So in this case, we want to upgrade to CanJS 4. So that's what we're saying here. One thing to note here is that you want to make sure that your glob patterns are in quotes like this. If you don't, then bash or whatever terminal you're using will automatically expand those and it'll not do what you want it to do. So with can migrate and really any command line tool, you want to make sure you surround your glob patterns in quotes like this. So then we run that, and this is going to give you some output. It's going to tell you the name of the code mod that it's running, and it's going to tell you how many files it actually changed. You can see one of these can route register changed one of the files in our app. In a bigger app, this will do a lot more changes. So you can run that like I'm doing here on the JavaScript files and then on the stash files. In a bigger app, you can also run this on specific modlets or specific modules or components one at a time. If you have tests and demo pages for those, it's much easier to run them one at a time, or much safer to do it that way. This is a pretty small app, so I just did it on all of the JavaScript files and then all of the stash files. So once you're done, take a look, or once the can migrate tool runs, take a look at the changes that were made. Some of these things, like this new can import, you'll have to actually install new dependencies. So this is adding a can import for can-stache route helpers. The code mod doesn't change your package.json, so you need to install that yourself.
There was something that moved. I think it was maybe can map backup went to can define backup or something like that. Or I wasn't using define maps. If you know you're changing from the old can map with can define to can define maps, should you do that install now or just wait for the errors after the migration tool?
So I would do that later. I wouldn't do that along with the code mods because it's not really related. It'll be much easier to tell when those things either break in your tests or whatever later on that you need to do that. The code mods aren't going to like change from can map to can define map. The code mods aren't going to do that kind of stuff for you. So there's no need to do that now.
Okay, good.
Okay, cool. So then after that, what you want to do is actually test. So in this app, I'm going to run my tests. So cool, the tests all pass automatically, so we must be done. If we had perfect tests, that would be the case, but obviously no tests are perfect. So you want to do some manual testing. Obviously test your app any way that you normally do. Have your run through your test suite or have your QA do it or whatever you want to do to test. We can find some additional things that are broken here or that are still not working. A lot of these are visual things that your test might not cover. We'll talk through exactly what this changes that I'm making here later on. You can skip through and see once everything is working manually, then we're done. The upgrade is done. It's time to celebrate. All right, cool. So let's take a look at the actual changes that you might need to make in 4.0. So I've separated these out into two different groups, minor changes as well as major changes. So these aren't really related to the code changes inside of CanJS. These are really, I've broken them up into like how big the changes will be in your application. So minor changes will probably require some small code changes in your application, they're mostly covered by code mods, and if they're not, they're really easy to fix manually. Major changes might require larger changes. They're not handled by code mods. There's only a few of these, and we'll talk about those. All right, so let's get into it. The first minor change, CanJS 4.0 adds a new module called can-Queue that does all the event batching within CanJS. So what used to be can event batch is no more. Now, if you're manually batching things in your application, you want to get rid of that, install can-Queue and use queues.batch.start instead of can-batch.start. We have this nice little robot emoji here that tells us that this is handled automatically by the code mod. So you don't actually have to make this change yourself. This will happen when you run can-migrate. All right, the next thing is that custom events, so events that aren't natively supported by the DOM, are no longer included automatically. So this is like the inserted event, removed event, the enter event, things like that that aren't actual DOM events are not included by default. You have to do a little bit of work to include these. So if you're using inserted and removed events, what you'll want to do is install this can-3.4 compat package, which makes inserted and removed work exactly like it used to. You can use the connected callback, which is a new thing that replaces inserted and removed events if you want to. But during the upgrade process, I would recommend just installing this compat package and changing as little of your code as possible. So that's all you need to do for this is just import this package. You'll probably also have to add this as a dependency. This is one you'll have to do manually. The enter event. So if you're doing something like on enter, or if you're in your events object, you're using the enter event, that also is not supported natively by the browser. So we need to add some code. In this case, can event DOM enter and this add global module, which is what actually adds this global enter event. This is another one that you need to do manually. All right, so another change that we made is we moved all of the special stash keys into a single place. So now all of these special keys are under this one scope keyword. So you used to have %index key, element, event, ViewModel, arguments, all of these things that start with %. Those are all now under scope. So these changes in stash are done automatically for you by the code mods. Also, reference variables, so these variables that used to start with this asterisk are also moved. These are under a new keyword called scope.vars, which is should help you more easily understand what this is. So this is a scope variable for this my partial, instead of having to use these special characters. You'll have to do these manually. All right, another change is the log helper has been removed. So now all of our map and list types have a log method on their prototype. So this log helper was conflicting a lot with those, which made it not work. So we moved this and we also added some functionality. So now all of the console methods are available in Stash. You can use console.log or console.error, console.time and timeend are pretty interesting to use in Stash.
Nice.
All of those things are available on the console. There are some changes. So this naked log helper here, I can use this cool pointer. This naked log thing used to automatically get past the context. Now you'll want to make this console.log this in order to log the current context if that's what you're trying to do. You shouldn't probably have any of these in your code since this is normally just used for debugging. It's only kind of temporary. But in case you do, you'll have to make these changes manually. All right, the next thing on all of our types, the each method has been removed. The same reason as the log helper. This was conflicting with the each stash helper. So we moved these to forEach. So now if you were using each on something like a define list or a can list or whatever, those are gone now. You'll have to use forEach instead. And you'll have to do these manually. There's no code mod for this right now. If anyone's interested in writing a code mod for this, we're totally open to having one. We just haven't written one now. It would be fun to write probably. If anyone's interested in learning about code mods, feel free to reach out to us.
He said for the manual stuff, it's better to do it after the migration tool. Or should you do this one like pre-running the code mod migration tool?
For this one specifically, I would probably do it after. Yeah.
Good.
And it'll be really easy to spot these. You'll get like each is not a function.
Okay. Messages will help. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll throw an error saying this each is not a function because we've removed it. So
great.
All right, the next thing is something that we saw in the video when the code mod was running, or when I was making manual changes. So you used to be able to set properties on a component's view model by passing a string like this. So this in 3.0 would set bit panels, view models, title property to be lunch menu. It doesn't do that anymore. So now what you'll have to do is either use a stash binding with the from bindings and then wrap this in two sets of quotes, so like a double quote and then a single quote, and that will do what it used to do. Or you can use the new raw binding. So this raw will actually set the raw string instead of trying to do a stash lookup. I
like the raw one, stands out more.
Yeah, I think for strings, this is really easy. So this one's a little bit complicated. The code mod is going to do as much as it can. It's going to do its best to figure out which attributes need to be converted. But it's not possible to know 100% of the time. So for example, in this example, title is a valid HTML attribute. So the code mod doesn't automatically change this. But for things that are not valid attributes, the code mod will actually change these to the from binding version.
So does raw work with other types, or do you just use type coercion on the view model?
But raw just says don't do a scope lookup for this, just set it to the raw string value. But since if you don't want it to be a string, then you'll have to use type coercion.
Gotcha.
The attribute values have to be strings, I believe.
Cool, thanks.
Yep. Good question. So the next thing is can-define backup. So if you're using the can-define backup plugin, this used to work automatically. So all you had to do was import can-define backup, and then automatically all of your define maps would have this backup and restore properties. This doesn't happen anymore. We're moving a lot of these plugins to be mix-in based so that they don't make global changes throughout your application. So what you have to do now in 4.0 is actually import this as a named function and then call that function on the constructor that you want to have the backup and restore methods. This one you'll have to do manually. All right, there's some minor changes to the can route APIs. We saw these, or maybe I skipped over them in the video at the beginning. So now this used to be what you would do in 3.0. You'd call route and pass it whatever routes you wanted, and then call route.ready to actually start routing. So now these are route.register and route.start are the new APIs that you'll want to do in 4.0. And these are all done for you automatically by the code mods.
Awesome.
Cool. The next thing, next minor change is default values in can-define. So this used to use this value property or value definition on this property definition, and this would set a default value for this property. In 4.0, this is default instead of value, since that's what it is. It is a default value. And we're also using value for streaming property definitions, which we'll see later. This one is done automatically as well. All right, this syntax has been deprecated for a while now. This each item is as item syntax. So a lot of people wanted to get the index from this also, and we were trying to figure out how to provide both the value and the index, or if items is an object, the key and the value. So what we decided to go with instead is this newer syntax using a hash expression, item equals value. So this was deprecated a while ago, but it's been removed in 4.0. So you should make sure you change these if you still have this. And you'll have to do that manually, although the deprecation warning's been around for a while, so you've probably already made that change if you're on 3.0. All right, so there's a method called CanJS-stache.getHelper. This is really an internal API. It's not documented. It's not a documented part of Stash, but we ran into this in upgrading an app, so I thought we would include it. So what this used to do is return back an object that had an FN property that would actually give you back the helper. So if for some reason you registered a helper in one place and you wanted to use the functions like this function here somewhere else, you would call getHelper and then use the fn property. In 4.0, that is gone. Dash.getHelper will actually give you back the helper. So you can just drop this .fn. This is a typo. This should be my helper still. All right, we did it. We made it through all the minor changes. Oh, now we got to go through the major changes. These ones will be might require some larger code changes in your application. Hopefully, it's been painless so far, so you don't feel like Homer. There's only a few of these that we'll go through in detail. These major changes. The first one is that the old binding syntaxes have been removed. So again, this is something that's been deprecated for a while. There's a lot to learn with the newer syntax, but we can kind of summarize it here. We've got, hopefully it's much easier to learn than the old syntax. There's no more special characters. Everything can be camel cased. And there's some other small changes. So we'll go through these. So event bindings, you'll want to use the new on bindings. Then two-child bindings use from, parent, two parent bindings use to, and then two-way bindings are using bind. There's no more $signs to differentiate between DOM elements and ViewModel. That's all done. Like I said, it's camel case. There's no special characters. Hopefully, it's much easier to learn these than it was to learn the old syntax. All of these things are done automatically by the code mods for you. If the bindings are new to you, we're not going to go through them in detail, but there is another presentation that go through these bindings, take a deeper dive into the new bindings. So you can go to this presentation if you want to learn more about that. Okay, the next thing is that there's no support for can-jquery in CanJS 4.0. So there's a few places where this might affect your code. The first one is shown right here. So the element on your component is no longer jQuery wrapped. So if you're using inserted and removed events, or if you're accessing the element for your component in another way, it used to be able to do something like this, where you could just use the element and then call a jQuery function on it. You can't do that anymore. You'll have to import jQuery yourself. And
this
then
was a 3.0 change, though.
No, well, can-jquery is still supported in 3.0.
Okay, I get what you're saying. The compatibility, if you had pulled in can-jquery.
Yes. Now there's no support, but you can't pull in can-jquery to get this old behavior anymore. Yeah, so now what you'll have to do is manually wrap your elements in jQuery if you want them jQuery wrapped. Another situation where this might impact your code is if jQuery is being used to dispatch events. So if you're doing something like using jQuery to trigger a change event and you want that to work in tandem with CanJS's binding syntax, this doesn't work anymore in 4.0. So if you're doing this in your own code, it's an easy change to make. All you have to do is use CanJS's event system to dispatch that event instead of jQuery's trigger to dispatch it. If it's in third-party code, it's a little bit more work. So if you're using like a jQuery plugin that's doing something like triggering change events, it's a little more work. Take a look at some examples of that in the next couple slides. So this is an example where we're using a jQuery datetime picker. I think the plugin's called jQuery datetime picker. So internally, this datetime picker is dispatching change events in order to actually update the value of your input. And it's doing that through jQuery since it's a jQuery plugin. So if you want this to actually update the start date on your ViewModel when the datetime picker plugin changes, you'll have to do a little bit of work. So in this case, what I did is I took a look at this plugin and found that it has this method that you can override in order to handle when the datetime changes, and you can dispatch the events yourself. So that's kind of one situation. If there's a way that you can hook into the plugin, figure out when it's going to dispatch change events with jQuery, and then you can dispatch them with CanJS's event system. Another situation that I ran into in upgrading an app is in jQuery autocomplete. I don't remember, it's called jQuery select or jQuery select to or something like that. Oh yeah, select to, it's right here. So in this case, this autocomplete is dispatching or triggering a change event with jQuery when you select a new item in the autocomplete dropdown. In this case, there's no method that can be overridden, but they do have their own event system that you can listen to. So what I did in this case is listen for their events and then dispatched an event with CanJS. All of these things are a little bit different, but there's normally some way you can hook into what the jQuery plugin is doing and dispatch a standard DOM event using CanJS. So if you run into these and you can't figure out how to make it work with your app, please feel free to reach out to us. We should be able to help. All right, a couple of things left. So the next major change is that functions are no longer called automatically in Stash. So in CanJS 3.0, there was a few places where functions would be called automatically by Stash, and that's not happening anymore. Let's take a look at those. All right, so this is the first scenario. So if you had a function like this, say hello, that returned a string or whatever, and you just had this kind of naked tag, magic tag in Stash, in 3.0, this would automatically call this function, and you'd get some output like this. In 4.0, it's not going to call the function. What it's going to do is try to toString the function, and it's going to display that, and that's what's going to be displayed in your app. Luckily, in 3.0, we've got this warning that says, say hello is being called as a function. This won't happen automatically in an upcoming release. You should call it yourself. Another situation is if you are passing a function to a helper or to another function, like for instance, this if. So should say hello is a function that returns back false. So if you say if should say hello, in 3.0, what would happen is it would actually call should say hello, it would get back false, and it would display this goodbye. In 4.0, what's happening is it's going to just check if this is truthy. So is should say hello truthy, and it's going to actually show you the opposite case, which is pretty bad. The opposite thing happens. Luckily, in 3.0, we've got this same warning. If you fix all these warnings in 3.0, you shouldn't run into this kind of problem. The last scenario is with can-stache binding. So if you've got a binding like onClick and you pass it a function, but you're not calling it, in 3.0, this would actually happen automatically. You would click this and click handler would be called. You'd get this warning that says not to do that, but it would actually work. In 4.0, you'll get this error because we're not actually going to click the function. We're not actually going to call that function when you click on this button. So when you make this change, one thing to be aware of is the arguments that get passed implicitly to these functions. So if you made this change and you just took click handler and called it as a function, you could end up getting a warning or an error, something like this. It says can't read property, whatever. So if you go and take a look at click handler's code, you can see that it's actually expecting to receive some argument. So in 3.0, this automatically called function would actually get called with some arguments. So you need to be aware of that. When you make this change, make sure you take a look at what arguments is that function expecting, and how do I pass those correctly. So the correct way to do this in 4.0 is actually to pass the current context. So you should say click handler, pass this to it so that this is the current context, which is what would have been passed implicitly by 3.0.
I don't recognize that flash star syntax.
Yeah, just your way. This isn't valid. This is a JavaScript comment.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I see the end. Okay.
Yeah, so just pointing out, in 3.0, the arguments would have been the context, the element, and the event. So if you're trying to match that exactly, that you would pass this whole thing. All right, we're on to the last change. So in 4.0, we've removed automatic scope walking from Stash. So we'll talk about, real quick, give an example of what that means. So previously in 3.0, if you did something like this, where you're looping over a list, so you're looping over this people list here, and then you're saying greeting and name. So what's going to happen when it looks up greeting, it's going to check if this first object has a greeting property, not find it, and it's going to walk up the scope to the kind of the root, which is this, and find this greeting. So in 3.0, what you would get is something like this, where it says goodbye, and then each of the people. You'll also get this warning here at the bottom that says greeting is not in the current scope. It's being read from the parent scope. In 4.0, what you're going to get is it's not going to read that greeting property. So it's not going to automatically walk up the scope to find the greeting. And you're also going to get this new warning, which is going to give you some suggestions for what keywords you could use to actually read greeting correctly, and it's actually going to give you the context. So in this case, these all point to the same thing, but it's possible that these could point to different things. So you can figure out, well, which one of these did I actually mean? Cool. So that's kind of the first scenario, is when you're using automatic scope walking. That's the first scenario really where you might see this unable to find key warning. There's a couple other scenarios that we'll take a look at. So the next one is there's two situations where you might get the same warning but not get the suggestions for what the correct key is. So there's a couple things that could cause that. The first one is that you just simply misspelled something. So in this case, if you had a typo or whatever and you misspelled greeting, you're going to get this warning. It's not going to give you any suggestions because there's no creating property in your code. So in order to figure that out, you can actually use some debugging, and Stash will do a quick aside on how to debug templates. So if you've got something like this creating property, you can look, say, my app view line 2, find that. You can use this debugger helper in Stash to actually debug this to figure out what did I actually mean. So if you put that in and then you run your app, what's going to happen is when Stash tries to render that section, you're going to hit this debugger in the actual DevTools, and it's going to give you this console down here that says use getPath to debug this template. So you can call this get function and pass it any key that you could use in a magic tag in order to debug that key. So if you look at get this, that's going to give you the current context, and you can see, well, here I misspelled greeting, so I can just fix that, spell correctly.
That's awesome.
All right, so another situation where you might get a warning like this that says unable to find key and doesn't give you any suggestions is a little bit more complicated than a simple typo. So let's take a look at this example. So in this example, I've got an if block that says if should show greeting, I show the greeting, and then there's a button down here that says show greeting. So if we kind of look at this code, we can see, well, that show greeting method is actually setting this should show greeting property on my view model. So why am I getting that warning? So what's happening is when Stash initially tries to render this, it's looking for should show greeting and it doesn't find it. So it gives you this warning that says it's unable to find it. So if you have properties like this that are only defined sometimes, then whenever they're not defined, Stash is going to give you this warning. So what you can do to fix this is you can either give this should show greeting property a default value, or you can use the can-map define plugin if you're using can-map or can-define map to give this a definition, just say should show greeting, and then give it, define it as a Boolean or whatever, and that'll make this warning go away. If you're interested in seeing a slightly larger code example or a more well-written explanation of these, you can take a look at this post on the forums. All right, we've made it through all the changes that you might have to make in CanJS 4.0. Let's take a look at how much more you get once you're on 4.0. Is anyone old enough to understand this?
That reference?
Yeah, couldn't find that. Anyway, doesn't matter. GIFs are hard. Cool, so let's take a look at the 4.0 improvements. So the Stash templates are simplified a lot in 4.0. We talked about scope walking a lot and automatic function calling a lot. These confuse lots of new users, so it should make it a lot easier to onboard new developers. Improved event queuing. So we talked a little bit about can-queues. All these changes were really under the hood, except for the one batch change that we talked about at the very beginning. But this should make Stash a lot more deterministic, could avoid repaints and reflows and that kind of stuff. We'll also see how this helps with debugging. Easier component setup. We'll see an example of that. Class and proxy-based observables. This is can-observe. We'll talk about those. Streaming property definitions. Talk about those as well. And then DevTools, debugging tools. Got a lot of stuff there. So let's jump into this. So easier component setup. In Stash 3.0 or CanJS 3.0, this was kind of the simplest setup for creating a component and showing it in the page. You had to import component, some sort of observable in Stash, do this extend, pass it, all this stuff. And then you also had to call Stash to render your new component. So there's a lot of boilerplate here and a lot of stuff to learn for new people. So we've removed a lot of that in 4.0. So you can kind of see this is all the stuff that goes away in 4.0. And you are left with a really simple setup where you can just pass a string as your view and an object as your view model. And this will do the same thing that that previous example did. It'll make a stash renderer out of this string, and it'll make a extended define map constructor from this object. The other thing that we're doing is we're actually registering components as web components or custom elements, so you can use this my app directly in your HTML. Cool. Class and proxy-based observable. So a new project called can-observe. To understand the problems this is solving, take a look at a brief history of observables in CanJS. So can-map and can-list are kind of the oldest observables that we're going to talk about. They've been around for a while. A lot of people are still using them. They're great, but they do have some problems. So, for example, you always have to call functions in order to make changes. So you have to use adder all over your code in order to set properties, remove adder to remove them, and all this kind of stuff. But what you do get is you get nice observables. So you can listen to when properties change. And here we set first to Kevin, we get this change event. We set it change from undefined to Kevin. And then if you remove first, it'll change back from Kevin to undefined. So can define map, define list are a big improvement on this. They look and feel a lot more like normal objects and normal arrays. You can do things like just setting properties using dot or array notations, which is awesome. There are some caveats though that trip a lot of people up. For instance, in this example, you can do this myapp.first, and it will give you this change event, but deleting the property doesn't actually trigger a change event. The object defined property API that we're using just doesn't have a way to solve this problem, to listen for when things are deleted. So that's where we get to can-observe. So with can-observe, we're using ES6 proxies under the hood. So this is a new browser API that lets us have the best of both worlds. We can get all of these change events. We can make things look and feel a lot more like objects and arrays. You can delete things normally. ES6 proxies allow us to have hooks for all of these things that we need, for when things are set, when properties are deleted, when you get properties, even for properties that don't exist. So you don't have to predefine anything. Can-observe also lets you use class declarations, so you can extend observe.object or observe.array in order to, which will let you do computed properties like this. You can use setters, and there's even decorators and things like that you can use for more advanced behaviors. If you're interested in can-observe, definitely go and check out the docs. All right, streaming property definitions. This is something we've been talking about for a long time, how to better use streams inside of CanJS. To understand the problems this is solving, let's take a look at this problem. So we've got this city state picker down here at the bottom. This is an example that's been around CanJS for a long time. So the issue here is that we want to set city in two different ways. We want to set city when you actually select a city from the dropdown, and we also want to reset the city to null when you set the state. So if you pick a new state, this goes back to this choose a city. The problem with this is that we have to create this setter that has a side effect for when the state is set. So in this simple example, this doesn't seem that bad. There's just a setter on state that resets city. It's really easy to understand what's going on. But in larger examples, this becomes horrible. I've seen some code that's doing similar things to this, and it's extremely hard to track down when these examples get bigger. Properties in your ViewModel are changing, and you can't see in your code anywhere where this is happening because you have this definition for one property spread out across a large file or even multiple files. I've seen people that in a setter will call out to a function in another module and pass it the entire ViewModel, and that's just going to do all kinds of crazy mutations. That kind of stuff gets really hard to maintain. So with streaming property definitions, we can have this kind of behavior, but keep the entire definition for city within its property definition. So this is the code for that same example. So when city is set, we're listening to this last set observable and resolving with the new value. And then when state is set, we're listening to when state is set and we're resolving with null. So this handles that same behavior, but keeps all of the definition within city's property definition. For complicated components, this can really make your code a lot easier to read and write and maintain over a long time. All right, the rest of this presentation, we're going to talk about debugging and DevTools. So the first thing here is really simple. Seems like a small thing. Throughout CanJS, we have a lot of code that looks like this. So we are defining a name property on all based on any user-facing function. So we've got some code like this, and what does this mean? So what this does is when you're debugging, this gives you really nice names in the call stack. So you can see I've got this getter for name that just combines first and last, and we can see when we're clicked in there, we're at this myFVM's name getter, and this thing is named correctly. I can understand what this function is. It's a simple thing, but when you're debugging, this can make a huge difference. All right, the biggest thing is there's now a Chrome extension for CanJS Devtools. So we'll take a look at what you can do with this extension and then the APIs that make it possible. So currently, there's three main pieces to the Devtools. There's a ViewModel editor, a bindings graph, and then the queues stack. Let's take a look at each of these. So the ViewModel editor, when you're clicked on a ViewModel, for a long time you've been able to edit your ViewModel using the can-ViewModel API in the console, but this is really complicated. Now what you can do is when you're clicked on a component in the elements panel here, you'll get in this sidebar, you'll get this new option for CanJS ViewModel. Click on that, it pulls up this JSON editor that lets you say, set properties, see the current state of the entire ViewModel. You can add or remove items from lists. You can do anything you want to do to modify your ViewModel right here in this editor.
And you would see live updates in the browser when you change like a name or something.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll see this updating live, and then all of your changes will happen live in your HTML. Yeah, you'll see it right there in your code.
That's cool.
Does this work with Ilum now?
Does this work with Ilum now? Yeah, I think so. The last time we tested it, it did. If it doesn't, we should fix it, but it should.
Okay, cool.
Cool. The next thing is the bindings graph. So this allows you to see how different pieces of your application are connected through CanJS and CanJS's observables. So in this case, so when you're clicked on a component, you've got another option over here for the CanJS binding graph. So what this is going to do is if your element that you've got selected is a component, it has a ViewModel, it's going to select its ViewModel and then show you the bindings for the first property of that ViewModel. You can actually click on this where it says first here, and you'll get this nice drop down of all of the available keys on the ViewModel. And you can select these and see all of the bindings and all of the relationships, the dependency data for that property. If you have an element selected that doesn't have a ViewModel, like this input element, but it still has bindings, you can also debug that here. So we've got this input, we're using can-bindings to two-way bind to this first property, and we can see that here in this bindings graph. So the input element value is connected through the scope key data for first back to your AppVM's first property.
That's nice.
What's the difference between the solid lines and the dotted lines there?
I don't remember. So one of those is mutations, and the other one is what is it called? Dependencies?
Derived.
Derived values. But in this graph, I am not positive which one is which.
I think solid is a dependency, and then dotted means it can be set by.
So like if you have a getter that uses another value, that's going to be like a solid line representing that relationship, but a binding is going to be the dotted line.
Yeah, so for example, this there's this scope key data for first, and this attribute observable. This will not change this scope key data. These two just derive their value from each other. That's why you get these dotted lines.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
You can kind of see it, like you see how my app's name getter is derived. It's listening on first and last property, but it's not setting those. It's just deriving from those.
Yeah, okay, makes sense.
Cool.
That's a really cool feature, by the way.
Thanks. So there's also APIs you can use to programmatically look at this data. So a lot of this stuff for the bindings graph here is supported by can-debug. So you can run this can-debug log what changes me. There's also log what I change, which gives you the data that's kind of used to back this graph. So you can look at this and if you want to do something with this data programmatically, you have these APIs that are backing this graph that you could use. There's a lot of docs for can-debug. Check those out if you want to learn more about these APIs. All right, the last piece of Devtools, the last sidebar, is this queues stack. So here, if you're at a breakpoint or if you're in the sources panel, here in the sidebar, you've got the normal call stack, which gives you all of the JavaScript call stack. But then down here, you've got the CanJS queues stack, which will give you all of the functions that run as a part of CanJS's queue system, CanJS's event system. And it allows you to click on these and see exactly what's going on, what caused whatever change is happening to happen. So you can kind of trace this back through. And for example, for this case, we've got this name change count. And we can see that what caused this to happen was this input element changed the scope.first property. You can click through these functions and it'll actually take you to where these functions are defined if you want to set other breakpoints or all that kind of stuff, just like the normal call stack.
So no more aimless wandering through the batches code, trying to find what triggered my change. That's cool.
Nice.
Yeah, exactly. And similar to the last one, there are programmatic APIs you can use to get this data also. So this is all in CanQueues. So you can run CanQueues log stack here in the console to get all the data that's backing this call stack panel. This gives you a little bit more information. You can see some metadata, some additional stuff, click through to other functions and all that kind of stuff if you want to look at the raw data. As a part of this, we have a new debugging guide that you can click on this link here if you're interested in seeing more about the new DevTools and debugging tools that are available. With that, we are done. Any questions from you guys?
That was pretty awesome.
Cool.
A lot of good debug stuff in 4.0.
Yeah, it's a big part of what we did. All right, if there are any other you have a question, Austin?
Real quick. So I remember earlier you said that there's not like a lot of breaking changes between 4.x and 5.x. Mm-hmm. If you move to 4.0, will it be really easy to then move to 5.0 in the following months or whenever that becomes the new recommended version? Yeah,
so Justin can probably add a little bit more than I can, but that is the idea. Is the 5.0 changes are very small compared to the 4.0 changes. There's a few small breaking changes, I think, around can routes and push state, and then the bigger changes are in the model layer of can connect. So, but yeah, I think the idea is it should be relatively easy to go to 5.0 once you're on 4.0.
Is there any reason to not jump to 4.0 and then immediately jump to 5.0?
No, you should do it.
I mean, if that's where you're coming from. Like the only way I would see that is if you're doing really crazy stuff in your set algebra. We created a backwards compatible set there's a can set legacy that essentially builds to what's now called a query logic instance, but it's not 100% compatible. It's not compatible with like really weird custom extensions you might do. So you would have to probably rewrite them in query logic, it's easier to write them in query logic than it would be in can set logic. But other than that, all of the 5.0 doesn't even, it changes push state in like the smallest little one-line change, and then it's some relatively minor. You got to use can-query logic instead of can-set algebra, but there's a compatibility layer. So even that, as long as you're doing which most apps probably are doing, you probably won't have to do anything other than switch to the legacy set algebra.
And are those changes you have to do manually, or is there a code mod for those?
Those you have to do manually for right now.
Okay.
But the good thing is like model layers typically are, you know, even big applications, they'll have like 100 components, but they'll have like 6 or 7 models. So it's not really, you know, it's something that can be done in a day easily, I think.
Okay, cool. Good to know.
Because just to make sure that the Y can component in CanJS 5.0, can component, can stash, all of those layers are the same packages as they are in 4.0. So like that, you're not even changing. If you go to 5.0, you're not even changing your whole view model, view, define map, that layer. You're really just changing your model and one little breaking change to support tree shaking in can route push thing.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that.
Cool, good question. All right, if there's no other questions, thank you guys for joining. Thank you everybody out there that's watching on the YouTubes. I think this is where we say like and subscribe if you like these videos. All right, thanks guys.
Thanks, Kevin. Good stuff.
Thanks, Kevin.